Killer Talent. Chapter 1. The Success and Secrets of Jonathan Blake. Jonathan Blake was known as one of the most talented writers of his generation. His novels captured the hearts of millions of readers worldwide, and critics praised his ability to create gripping and tense plots. However, no one knew about the dark side of his life, except for himself. Behind the facade of a successful writer hid a ruthless serial killer who turned his real deeds into literary works. Jonathan not only enjoyed his crimes but also took sharp pleasure in the fact that his books, mocking the police and detectives, became bestsellers. Today was an ordinary day. Jonathan sat in his luxurious office, surrounded by shelves filled with books he had written. On the desk in front of him was an open laptop displaying a new chapter of his latest novel. He took a sip of coffee and smiled, recalling recent events. His new novel, Shadows of Glory, was meant to be a true masterpiece. Jonathan had poured all his emotions, all his experiences, and memories of his crimes into it. He was confident that this book would be his best work. Meanwhile, in another part of the city, young detective Emily White sat at her desk in the police station, studying yet another report on a new murder. She was engrossed in her work and determined to catch the serial killer who was terrorizing the city. She had a feeling that this time she would find a clue. Chapter 2. Emily White and the Elusive Maniac. Emily White sat at her desk in the police station, deep in thought. Her partner, Mark Taylor, approached and put a hand on her shoulder. "Emily, you're at it again?" "Third report today," he said with a slight smile. "I can't just let it go, Mark," Emily replied. "This killer is playing with us. There's something strange in every murder, like he's mocking us." Mark nodded. He knew that Emily was one of the best in her field, and her intuition rarely failed her. "Did something specific catch your attention?" he asked. "Yes," Emily replied, pointing to a printout. "Look at this. All the victims have something in common, but I can't figure out what it is yet." Mark took the printout and began studying it. "You think it's the work of the same person?" "I'm sure," Emily said. "But he's too smart. He knows how to hide and leave minimal traces." Meanwhile, Jonathan Blake, having finished another chapter of his novel, went to meet with his publisher, Sarah Miller. Sarah was always impressed with Jonathan's work and believed that his new books would bring even greater success. "Jonathan, your new book is a masterpiece," Sarah said when they met in her office. "I'm sure readers will love it." "Thank you, Sarah," Jonathan smiled. "I've poured my soul into it. I hope it meets the expectations." As Jonathan discussed his book with Sarah, Emily continued her investigation. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was missing something important. She decided to revisit old cases and look at them with fresh eyes. "Emily, you're not going to stay late again, are you?" Mark asked, watching her focused face. "No, Mark. But I have a hunch that the key to solving this is somewhere in these old reports," she replied, diving into the documents. While Emily delved into old cases, Jonathan returned home and sat at his laptop again. He felt that this night would be productive. New scenes for his novel were already forming in his mind, along with new plans for his second life. Chapter 3. Shadows of the Past. Emily White flipped through old cases, lost in thought. It seemed that all the victims were connected by an invisible thread, but this connection eluded her. Each report, each photograph reminded her of the killer's inhumanity, leaving no chance for his victims to escape. Mark Taylor, watching Emily, furrowed his brow thoughtfully. "Emily, what if we try to look at this from a different angle? Maybe the killer is leaving messages we don't see." Emily looked at him, and her eyes lit up with new interest. "You're right, Mark. Maybe we're looking in the wrong place. Let's try a different approach." Meanwhile, Jonathan Blake was enjoying his success. His books were flying off the shelves, and he was invited for an interview on one of the most popular talk shows. The show's host, Catherine Hill, looked at Jonathan with admiration. "Jonathan, Your books are always filled with such tension and realism. Where do you get your inspiration?" Catherine asked. "From life, Catherine," Jonathan replied with a mysterious smile. "Every day offers us new stories and events. You just have to be attentive." While Jonathan enjoyed the public's attention, Emily and Mark began analyzing all the murders from a new perspective. They paid attention to small details that previously seemed insignificant. Emily realized that each murder was accompanied by a symbol hidden in the most unexpected places. "Mark, look at this," Emily pointed to a photo from a crime scene. "There's a mark here that repeats in every case. We just didn't notice it before." Mark looked at the photo and nodded. "Yes, this could be the key. We need to find out what this symbol means." Emily and Mark decided to check all the reports and photographs again to find this symbol in each case. Their work was yielding results, but they knew the killer was still out there, and each new victim could be the last. Chapter 4. A New Murder. That evening, as Emily and Mark worked on the cases, the news announced a new murder. This time, the victim was found in the city center, and the crime scene was exactly as Jonathan described in his new book. Emily immediately realized it was no coincidence. "Mark, we don't have time. We need to get to the crime scene immediately." When they arrived, they saw that the scene truly looked like it was ripped from Jonathan Blake's novel. Everything was replicated down to the smallest details: the position of the body, the traces on the ground, even the minor elements that could have seemed insignificant. "This is impossible," Mark whispered. "It's like the killer is reading the book and reenacting everything written in it." Emily felt a chill down her spine. "Mark, I have an idea. What if our murders are somehow connected to Jonathan Blake's books? Maybe the killer is a fan who is reenacting scenes from his novels." Mark looked at her with surprise. "You think that's possible?" "I don't know, Mark. But we have no choice but to check this theory," Emily said, diving into thoughts about how exactly they could link Jonathan's books to the real murders. Chapter 5. The Connection. Emily and Mark spent the entire evening studying Jonathan Blake's books and comparing them to reports of real crimes. The more they read, the more confident they became that the murders and novels were connected. "Emily, look at this," Mark said, pointing to a page in the book. "This describes a murder that almost completely matches the case we investigated a few months ago. Even details that weren't publicly disclosed." "This can't be a coincidence," Emily replied. "Someone is using his books as a guide. But why? And how are they getting such detailed information?" Emily decided to call her superior to discuss her findings. While she explained her theory, Mark continued to study Jonathan's books. "Chief, we have a theory that the murders may be connected to Jonathan Blake's novels," Emily said over the phone. "We found many coincidences that just can't be random." "That's a serious accusation, Emily," her superior replied. "We need more evidence before we can take action. Keep investigating and keep me updated." Emily hung up and turned to Mark. "We need to find out how these details are getting into Jonathan's books. Maybe he doesn't even realize his novels are being used this way." Mark nodded. "We could try to get access to his personal notes. Maybe there we'll find something that will help us." Chapter 6. Suspicions and Revelations. Emily and Mark decided to visit Jonathan Blake under the pretext of an interview. They wanted to learn more about his writing process and possibly find some clues. When they arrived at his office, Jonathan greeted them with a smile. "Hello, detectives. How can I help you?" "Hello, Mr. Blake," Emily began. "We're investigating a series of murders and would like to learn a bit more about your creative process. Do you mind?" "Of course not," Jonathan replied. "Please, come in. Make yourselves at home." Emily and Mark entered the office, where their attention was drawn to a wall covered with newspaper clippings and notes. They tried not to show their surprise and started the conversation. "Mr. Blake, Your novels often describe such realistic crime scenes. Where do you get your inspiration? Mark asked. Everything comes from life, Jonathan replied. I read a lot, talked to interesting people. Sometimes ideas just come to me. Emily glanced at one of the notes on the wall. What are these notes? Do you use them for your books? Jonathan smiled. Yes, these are my drafts and ideas. Sometimes I write down what comes to mind so I don't forget. Emily and Mark continued the conversation but didn't learn anything concrete. After the visit, they decided to return to the investigation and try another approach. Chapter 7. Jonathan's Mistake. Over the next few days, Emily and Mark continued to investigate Jonathan's books and personal notes. They were looking for any clue that could help them expose the killer. Their persistence paid off. Mark found a passage in Jonathan's new book that almost verbatim repeated one of the personal notes found at the crime scene. This was a major mistake that could cost Jonathan his freedom. Emily, look at this, Mark said, showing her the book. This passage is an exact copy of the note we found at the crime scene. This can't be a coincidence. Emily was stunned. We need to check all of Jonathan's notes and compare them with our data. If we find more like this, we'll have enough evidence. They worked all night, and their efforts were rewarded. They found several notes that confirmed their theory. Now they had evidence that Jonathan was not just a writer, but a man who used his books as a diary of his crimes. Chapter 8. The Trap. Emily and Mark were thrilled with their findings, but knew there was still a long way to go to arrest Jonathan. They decided to act cautiously and sought help from their superior, presenting all the evidence. This is incredible, the chief said, studying the documents. We need to act quickly and carefully. Any mistake could cost us the case. Emily suggested a clever plan. They would set a trap using Jonathan's latest notes. She and Mark would create a fake crime scene to see how he would react. In the evening, when the city was already asleep, Emily and Mark, along with several colleagues, prepared a scene mirroring one of Jonathan's novel chapters. Everything was done with maximum precision to avoid arousing suspicion. Chapter 9. Endgame. The next day, Jonathan, unsuspecting, woke up feeling satisfied. His latest book was a huge success, and he felt on top of the world. However, when he turned on the TV to catch up on the latest news, his confidence wavered. This morning, police discovered another body, the anchor reported. All signs indicate that it is the work of the same serial killer who has been terrorizing the city for months. Jonathan felt his heart stop. He knew he hadn't committed this murder, but the description of the crime scene was too familiar. It was his scene, his idea. He decided to go to the crime scene to see for himself. When Jonathan approached the cordoned-off area, he was met by Emily and Mark. They watched him from a distance, hoping he would reveal himself. "Do you see him?" Mark asked. "Yes, there he is," Emily replied, clutching the radio. "We're ready. Start the operation to arrest him." Jonathan, getting closer, felt a strange sensation. Everything was too perfect. He realized he had fallen into a trap, but it was too late. The police surrounded him, and he had no time to escape. "Mr. Blake, you are under arrest for a series of murders," Emily announced. "You have the right to remain silent." Jonathan, realizing the hopelessness of his situation, tried to stay calm. "You won't be able to prove anything," he said coldly. "You have no direct evidence." "You're wrong," Mark replied. "We have everything we need. Your notes, your books, it's all enough to convict you." Chapter 10. Aftermath. Jonathan Blake's arrest was a true shock to the public. Fans of his work couldn't believe that their favorite author turned out to be a serial killer. News of his arrest spread worldwide, and many felt betrayed. At the trial, Jonathan tried to defend himself, but there was too much evidence. He was found guilty and sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Emily and Mark finally could breathe a sigh of relief. Their hard work and persistence had led to justice. "We did it, Mark," Emily said, watching Jonathan being taken to prison. "We stopped him." "Yes, Emily," Mark replied. "Now we can sleep peacefully." The end. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to our channel and don't forget to hit the like button. Thank you for your attention.